Insects with modified DNA have never come this close to being set loose in a residential neighborhood. But that could all be changing, especially if you live down in the Florida Keys. We're just learning that the FDA is now considering an experiment by British researchers that would allow for the release of millions of genetically modified mosquitoes into the area, all in the hopes of stopping the spread of deadly viruses. The two being focused on here are chikungunya and dengue, which can cause a high fever and severe pain in the head and muscles. Those are both expected to pose a greater risk to Americans in the coming years. So the question is, how exactly does this work? Well, researchers with the biotech firm Oxitec are genetically modifying these mosquitoes by breeding them with fragments of genes from things like E. coli bacteria and cabbage. They focus on doing this particularly in male mosquitoes, and then they release them to mate with wild female mosquitoes. The idea there is that the offspring of that combination would die and thereby significantly reduce the overall mosquito population. Now, researchers say the experiment would mimic what was already done back in 2012 in the Cayman Islands. 3.3 million genetically modified mosquitoes were released there, and within 6 months, the wild mosquito population reduced by 96%. But experiments like that haven't quite convinced all Americans that the same should happen here. In fact, over 138,000 people have already signed a change.org petition calling on the FDA to stop this Florida experiment from going through. A lot of people are associating this latest initiative with genetically modified crops, which have gained a lot of criticism in recent years. The petition points to the prominence of genetically modified crops and how their cultivation eventually resulted in unintended consequences, particularly for humans. They worry about what might happen if one of these DNA-altered mosquitoes bites them. After all, most of the research that's been conducted has been done by the company overseeing this, Oxitec, and activists say nothing should go through until more third-party, peer-reviewed research can be done. The question now is whether the FDA will listen to public opinion. If not, Florida Keys residents could see their new genetically modified neighbors move in by the spring. Reporting in Washington, Amira David.
Sinkhole in Lafayette nearly swallows up this SUV. The driver still inside, teetering on the edge of a 15-foot deep hole that was just filled with water. The road collapsed into an old mining shaft on Cleveland Street in Lafayette. And we talked to the woman who took these pictures.
All I could see that was holding him up were the front bumper and the back bumper. Both of the tires were in the hole. There was no pavement. And he was as calm could be.
Can you believe that? The man wasn't hurt. And we're talking with his family tonight at 10 o'clock. And the city of Lafayette will fill that sinkhole and open the road in one direction in the next week. It will take a few months to permanently fix that sinkhole and open the road completely.
A tourist recording the scenery catches sight of a helicopter and zooms in for a closer look. At the same time, Yvonne Morrow and her group are looking out over the river.
We were looking across at New Jersey and pointing things out on a tour when all of a sudden we heard this pop and made us look up.
Seemingly from out of nowhere, a small plane appears as the helicopter is ascending.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Devastating collision is captured on video. The remains of both aircraft fall to the water. Captain Corcoran is almost directly below the falling debris.
Basically, at this point is when we had seen two major splashes. I didn't know what it was, to be honest with you, because it's the corner of my eye, just at this point right here. And it just went plop, plop. What the crew members had heard was people screaming. That's when I realized it was a small plane and a helicopter.
But we begin today in Plainfield, where for a third time in recent days, that area has been shaken by an earthquake. The ground began to rumble at about 7:30 this morning. News 8's Tina Detel live in Plainfield with more. And Tina, at this point, I can only imagine what people around town are saying.
Yeah, you know, Keith, they're not too happy about this, and they're hoping it stops. Now, we're on Blueberry Lane, and this is one of the streets which has people in it that actually felt, at least they say, 4 earthquakes yesterday, and they also felt this one this morning. Now, I want you to take a look at the ground here. This is a crack in the street, which folks here say was actually caused by the earthquake. One of the neighbors says that this is a freshly paved road, and in recent days, his wife has noticed this crack. Now, that same neighbor also brought us into his house. His name is Robert Elger, and he lives in the house right here. He tells us that he has also seen cracks in his house, one of them on his popcorn ceiling, and another neighbor actually told us the same thing. Now, he actually took some pictures off of his wall so they wouldn't fall down, one from his daughter. He didn't want to see that get cracked. Now, he works from home, and he says that was interrupted this morning by the quake.
It knocked me right off the line. It was that strong.
Off in the internet?
Yeah, my computer froze up and it knocked me right off.
Now, Elger tells me that he believes these smaller quakes have been happening for months, but because of the larger ones, the one this morning, the one last Thursday, and especially the largest one, which happened yesterday morning, he says that is just bringing attention to what has been happening here for a little while.
It was just a photo in a car magazine in Russia, but there in the background, sharp-eyed readers spotted something unique, and it's believed to be among the first photos of a secret new class of Russian nuclear submarines, the AC-12 project. Defense experts think that's what it is in the water, but they can't be sure because the sub's appearance has truly remained unknown.
We turn now to a traffic stop gone wrong for one police officer in Florida. A woman taking off, dragging that sergeant and injuring him. His daughter, one of the first on the scene to help him. The entire thing was caught on dash cam, and ABC's Rena Ninan has the story.
Watch as this routine traffic stop takes a stunning turn for the worse. This Florida police officer speaking to the driver when he gets taken for a ride. Sergeant Kirsten Tatro pulled over 30-year-old Amy Giorgio after she flew past him, driving erratically at speeds 30 miles over the limit. But when he asked her to step out for a field sobriety test, Giorgio hit the gas, dragging Tatro with her before he hits the ground hard.
Always remember, don't ever let my guard down.
Sergeant Tatro left writhing in pain on the roadside. That's when a group of drivers and bystanders rushed to his aid. One of the Good Samaritans, someone Sergeant Tatro knows well. That's Tatro's 16-year-old daughter, Faith, who happened to be passing by the incident on the way home from a trip to the mall. She saw the scene unfold while sitting at a stoplight, but wasn't sure it was her dad until she saw him lying there.
It made me feel sad, I guess, because I know that what he does is for a good reason. I just hope everybody else has a better respect for him.
After spending 3 days in the hospital, Tatro's family is happy to have him back safe and sound this morning, especially Faith.
He's been sleeping, catching up on sleep.
As for Giorgio, she's now charged with aggravated battery, fleeing the scene and driving under the influence. And Sergeant Tatro, he says he's anxious to once again hit the streets, though definitely not like this again.
Gross. Hey, we've got a big, powerful, and very impressive storm in the North Atlantic right now. It's absolutely hammering the UK. If you live there, you know what I'm talking about. Big old windstorm sticks out like a sore thumb on the satellite imagery. Look at that big counterclockwise spin. And it's one thing to look at it on satellite, but look at what this thing actually looks like on the ground. I mentioned the wind is the biggest problem. Look at these huge waves. This is from Northern Ireland, a vine from there. We've also had lots of snow into parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland as well, and of course plenty of rain from this storm. Now, this is actually a fairly typical storm for this part of the world. They'll happen from time to time, so it's nothing out of the ordinary. But the good news for these guys is that things are going to quiet down over the next few days.
First, we begin with yet another earthquake to hit our state. News 8's Tina Detel, who's been covering this story since the very beginning, is live in Plainfield today with what officials are now planning to do about all this. Tina.
Well, Keith, they're planning on getting information out to people because people around here are worried. As you said, 11 earthquakes in 1 week. It was literally last Thursday that the first earthquake in this cluster hit this town and shook everyone up. Now, we're on Plainview Drive, which folks around here say is near the epicenter of where these quakes have been happening. One resident actually brought us into her home. She brought us down to the basement, to the bar area, where she says bottles and glasses had shaken and rattled and then fallen off shelves, causing a big mess down there. You can see some of that video right now. Now, the folks here say they are in a location where they feel everything. They felt all the earthquakes. They feel them very strongly. And like many throughout this town and beyond, they are worried if things do get worse.
We do have some minor cracks in our bathroom walls, but I mean, they're minor, so we're not that worried right this second. But once, you know, if they keep getting any bigger, we could probably have some problems.
Something extraordinary is happening in Iceland. Lava just keeps on flowing from the Bardarbunga volcano. It started to erupt in August last year. The lava field now spreads over more than 80 square kilometers. 5 years ago, another Icelandic volcano spewed abrasive ash into the skies, grounding thousands of flights. But this time there's been no disruption, allowing a bird's eye view of this masterpiece of Mother Nature.
Over 2,100 dead, almost 500 of them children. The war in Gaza made 2014 the deadliest year for Palestinians since 1967. Now, the very first stage of a legal process that could see war crimes charges launched. When the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, signed the Rome Statute, the treaty that governs the International Criminal Court, on the last day of last year, he also signed a declaration giving the court jurisdiction from the 13th of June 2014. The chief prosecutor of the court, Fatou Bensouda, has now launched a preliminary examination into events from that date, in effect an initial inquiry to see if she should launch a formal investigation. In a statement, she said, upon receipt of a referral or a valid declaration, the Office of the Prosecutor, as a matter of policy and practice, opens a preliminary examination of the situation at hand. Accordingly, the prosecutor has opened a preliminary examination into the situation in Palestine. The office will conduct its analysis in full independence and impartiality. From Jerusalem, the reaction was swift and angry. Prime Minister Netanyahu said, "It's absolutely scandalous that just days after terrorists butchered Jews in France, the General Prosecutor is beginning an inquiry against the state of the Jews, and this only because we defend our citizens from Hamas. Unfortunately, this probe renders the ICC part of the problem and not part of the solution." Experts, though, say the prosecutor's move is not politically motivated.
I think the Israeli authorities should understand that this is a judicial process, and inherent in that is impartiality and application of law to facts. They also need to understand that the prosecutor will be looking at serious crimes committed by Israelis as well as serious crimes committed by Palestinians.
It's almost 3 weeks since the Palestinians signed up to the Rome Statute. Their aim then was partly legal but also political. They knew that the legal process, now in its very earliest stage, was going to be extremely drawn out. Politically, though, in this highly charged period of an Israeli election campaign, they're already making waves. James Bays, Al Jazeera at the United Nations.
Threat of Typhoon Michaela in the Philippines has forced the Pope to cut his Tacloban trip short by several hours. He's expected to take off, as I mentioned, any moment now and head to Manila. This was him boarding the plane just about 10 minutes ago. It was very windy as he made his way up the stairs to his airplane, blowing off his papal hat as he turned to wave goodbye to folks there. About an hour ago at the Metropolitan Cathedral, the Pope apologized for trimming his itinerary.
And the pilots of the aeroplane have insisted that we have to leave at 1 o'clock.
Appena abbiamo tempo di arrivare all'aereo.
Earlier, the Pope paid an emotional tribute to the thousands, the tens of thousands killed in Tacloban in 2013 by another storm, Super Typhoon Haiyan. Hundreds of thousands of people attended a huge outdoor mass dressed in rain gear that, well, matched the Pope's.
The devastation in southern Malawi. 2 major rivers broke their banks earlier in the week after days of heavy rain. Entire villages and towns have been swept away. The floods have affected at least a third of the country.
But the rains are likely to continue. If that happens to be the case, we need to get ourselves more prepared for more people, more materials to respond, more development actors, including donors.
but many are still trapped in far and hard-to-reach villages. The military and police have come to move these people to safer ground. There was a lot of resistance at first. Finally, some agreed to be airlifted. Women, children, and the old carrying what remains of their belongings. Some too weak to walk. They were flown to a school where more than 1,000 others are camped.
This family has refused to move to a displaced people's camp. They are reluctant to leave behind their homes and the little food they managed to salvage. Many people here say they're angry that help did not get to them when they needed it most.
We just go back home. The house was destroyed, but we will find a way to survive. My family and I need to protect our property.
But more people keep arriving at government shelters in town. Esther is just 4 days old. She and her mother were airlifted on Thursday. Esther spent her first days in the hills, sleeping outside in the cold. She developed sores and is feverish, her mother says.
I went into labor when the rain started. We were surrounded by water, so I gave birth behind our house. When the water was too much, I ran to the hills with my baby.
Those who've opted to go back home are hoping that the worst is over. But either way, it will take all of them a long time to rebuild their lives. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera, in Sanje district in southern Malawi.
More of the nerves rattled in Plainfield after a swarm of earthquakes has rocked that town this week.
Well, there were no earthquakes today, but still tonight, hundreds packed in to hear from experts about if a big one could be lurking. News 8's Bob Wilson live tonight at the Plainfield PD with more. Bob?
They had dozens and dozens of people call 911 as those earthquakes continue to roll in. And tonight, the police chief, the first selectman, and the people in the town thought they'd get ahead of it. They invited an expert down to explain earthquakes, try to educate the people, and give them some ideas on how to survive if a bigger earthquake hits this area.
It was comparable to a very, very large thunder boom.
Hundreds gathered at Plainfield High hoping for answers. 11 earthquakes have rattled windows and nerves in the past week, the largest measuring a magnitude of 3.3.
What might be next? What is this leading up to?
The town brought in an expert from Boston to talk about the recent seismic activity in the area, Dr. Alan Koska, the director of the Weston Observatory at Boston College. He says while earthquakes are nothing new to Connecticut, they are new to the Plainfield area, and he's trying to help people understand the science behind the quakes.
There's no evidence that this is a sign of anything new and big to come. I don't want to say, that can't happen, but that's the thing that's challenging about earthquakes, is that we really can't predict them.
The first part of the seminar was to educate. The second part was on emergency services and what to do should a bigger size earthquake hit. They said there's the typical things, which find a door frame. That's one of your safest and strongest places in a building. But they also said get out of the building if you can, have a plan. And they went on from there saying there are a lot of things you can do to protect yourself in your home.
Knowing where your utility shutoffs are, if you have gas, if you have propane, so you can shut those things off. And just know where to meet outside the house if you do have an emergency and if you do have to evacuate.
Tonight, people left the meeting armed with knowledge, but we're still a little on edge. They are used to blizzards and hurricanes, not earthquakes.
People are very concerned. They're nervous. It's something that we've never experienced in Plainfield before, so therefore it's something they're concerned about.
And people did come away with a sense of kind of relief, or at least an idea of how it works. In fact, you can't predict them, just kind of keeping their fingers crossed and hoping for the best. I'm Bob Wilson, reporting live in Plainfield, News 8.
For more on all this, we are joined by Time Magazine's senior science editor, Jeffrey Kluger, our favorite person to explain complex things to us on Saturday morning.
Thank you very much.
So this is 3 separate studies. Let's start off with the temperature one. What did it say?
Well, the temperature one said that, and here's a scary way to look at it. If you are 29 years old or younger, which disqualifies me, I must acknowledge, you have never lived in a month in which global temperatures were not higher than they were over the course of the entire 20th century average. Global temperatures this year are about 58.25 degrees worldwide, which is 2 degrees higher than the global average in the 20th century. Now, if 2 degrees doesn't sound like much, consider how different you feel when you run a 98.6 degree fever as opposed to close to 101. The planet is exactly as sensitive to those subtle changes as we are.
Jeffrey, one of the other studies, a Harvard Rutgers study, said that the oceans hadn't risen in the past century as much as we thought, 5 feet instead of 6. But it also said at the end of the century, it accelerated enormously, and we're now going up about a foot per century. What is that telling us?
Well, this tells us that we reach this sort of tipping point event. As oceans warm and as ice caps melt, what happens is sunlight stops being reflected back into space. Instead, it begins being absorbed by the darker waters of the ocean. So the more the ice caps melt, the faster they melt, and the more water is poured into the oceans, causing sea levels to rise. We're on a target now for 3 feet of sea level increase by the end of the century, and every inch of sea level increase is 2 quadrillion gallons of water, and that pours straight off the ice caps and straight off the glaciers.
It also seems to really affect what's happening underneath the water, all of the creatures that live below.
That's right. Yeah, we are at the verge of, this was a study that came out of Science, the verge of what's being called a major extinction event. The oceans are becoming warmer and also more acidic as a result of carbon being sunk into them. We're seeing collapse of fish stocks. We're seeing the migration of the surviving stocks from waters that have become too warm for them to colder waters. We're seeing collapse of coral reefs. Whales, which have until recently been protected by some global bans, are now dying as a result of collisions with the increased number of cargo ships. The ocean bottom is being damaged by bottom dredging and also by minerals resource mining. We're basically taking the one area of the world that we didn't have so much access to and damaging it in the same way we are the land.
Such an important conversation to be having right now.
It's quite scary.
Jeffrey Krueger, thank you so much.